Hi, my name is Edgar Soler and welcome to the Classic Industries Tech Center. Today we're going to be doing a rear deck lid and spoiler install for your first generation Camaro owners. Before we get started, I want to go over some of the products that we have available. The first thing we have here is a 1967-68 rear spoiler for your Camaro or Firebird. The 67 spoiler was not really a promoted item at the manufacturing plant, but more of like a dealer installed option. This particular model was more commonly found on the 68 version F-bodies. The next item that I have here is the 1969 rear spoiler. Now this rear spoiler slightly changed on the sides right here where they adjusted the contour a little bit. And it also became a little bit longer than your 67 or 68 model. Moving along down to the second generation Camaros, we have this one down here, which is the correct spoiler for a 1970s Z28. Basically, they kind of just lowered the profile a little bit, made it look sleeker. You can actually fit these on 70 to 81 model Camaros, but this is correct for a 1970 model. And the last one I have here is the larger spoiler used on 70 to 81 model Camaros. Now, there were two different variations. For a 70 to 73 model, you would use this outside corner here, which had a very narrow peak. This last one I show here is a 1974 to 81 outside corner. So they share the same centerpiece. These were also installed on the rear deck lid, but the outer edges were fastened to the rear quarter panels. Okay, we also have the correct style mounting hardware for your first generation rear spoiler, which features a serrated nut and also the acorn fasteners. So these are some of the options you have for your first and second generation vehicles. Let's go ahead and get started on our install. For this installation, you're going to need a marking pen, tape measure, a couple rulers, the 64th scale ruler works well, a scribe, center punch, some drill stops or a socket, some 1/8 inch Clecos, some Cleco pliers, a 1/8 inch drill bit, a 7/16 drill bit, a drill, some safety goggles, some type of prying device like a spoon, a short 1/2 inch socket, a short 7/16 socket, a long 7/16 socket, a ratchet, an extension, and tape. Okay, so here's the trunk lid, and as we can see, it's an early style production trunk lid because there was no access holes for the rear spoiler. So here's a few options for you first generation owners. We have correct factory style replacement trunk lids featuring all the correct access holes. This right here happens to be the 67 late model. It's got all the access holes in the inner structure for when you mount the optional spoiler. We also have this version in both the 68 and 69 with all the correct cutouts. For an all-in-one type replacement, we've got this one that covers the 67, 68, and 69. It already features the cutouts and also has these additional cutouts here for when you do have a spoiler and you want to mount your emblem a little higher up above the spoiler. Both of these trunk lids look the same when you look at it from the outside. Once we get it all installed, we'll go ahead and get started on the spoiler install. So the first thing to do is to remove the trunk lid by loosening and removing the 4 retaining bolts. There's 2 on each side. Now before you do that, you may want to scribe the location of the hinge to the actual mating surface of the trunk. And the other option would be to use like a Cleco to realign the deck lid when you're reassembling it. So here's a Cleco. Basically, these came out of the aircraft industry and they're used for fabricating and on sheet metal, basically to retain an item and hold it in its place. The Cleco is just a plier, and then here's a little cylindrical plug that expands itself when released. That way it'll hold the material in place. Let's use our center punch. We want to double check and make sure that we're not going to hurt anything behind it. Obviously, we don't want to make the holes directly through the trunk lid. You can use these stop collars on a drill bit. That way it bottoms the drill bit out and it will not go completely through the panel. But if you don't have any of these, you can do a quick, easy little trick here. You can just put a socket over your drill bit, which limits the depth of how far the drill bit's going to go into the material. Okay, so now that we've made our holes, we can use our Clecos to line this up when we reassemble the trunk. So go to your hole, you insert and release. That way, when you reassemble the trunk lid, you can line it up a little bit easier. So now we can go ahead and remove the trunk lid. Before we do that, you want to protect the car because your paint job may get scratched. So I just took a few shop towels and folded them up, and you can keep it on the car by just putting a piece of tape to hold it in place. Our trunk lid will rest right here when we remove it. So now that we've got all 4 bolts out, we can go ahead and release our clecos. Just kind of support the trunk lid a little bit, that way it doesn't fall down directly onto the panel. Once all your retaining hardware is removed, go ahead and lift the panel up out of the way. Anytime you're working with replacement sheet metal, you want to go ahead and look at the condition of the sheet metal. You know, look for any kind of damage or anything that you may have happened in mishandling before you install it. So just carefully look around the edges and check the skin on the other side. One other note before you install this, take a look at the threads. Just kind of thread your old bolts through there again to make sure that it goes in freely. A lot of times this coating that they put on these panels tends to kind of gum up the threads a little bit, and you just want to make sure that everything goes in and out smoothly. So our threads look to be good there. Make sure that you use the correct length hardware. The last thing you'd want to do is to put a long bolt in here and then have a problem where it hits the outer skin. So now to the other side, let's take a look at the skin. Appears to have no damage around the edges. Looks like we got a little tiny dimple there, but that's not a big deal. It doesn't necessarily make the panel defective. All these issues would have to be addressed at your body and paint prep stages. So what I would do here is I'd just take like a little file to that to level it out. So now that look, everything's good, let's go ahead and get it on the car. So you carefully come back down to the hinges. You can set it in place. Now these aren't gonna do us any good because we'd never drilled the holes in this pan, but this would help when you're reinstalling your old trunk pan. Okay, so we're gonna start from scratch and we're gonna do a little bit of adjustment. Gently lift this up and then you just thread your bolts in. Now this is why cleaning the threads and making sure that everything's working correctly is important, because it can be kind of hard holding this up in position and trying to turn a screw at the same time. And we'll just gently snug these down. You don't really want to tighten them yet, you just want to keep it from sliding. Be really careful when you're closing this and watch for clearance around here. If this is too far back, it will rub against your upper rear panel. It doesn't look too bad, this back corner. It's a little low. This side's a little tight, so we're gonna have to adjust this side. Right now I'm just loosening the bolts up. We're gonna take a body spoon and we're gonna put some protection tape on there, like your standard tape, except it's a lot thicker. And what this will do is when we move the panel up into position, it'll keep the paint from chipping and flaking, especially down here in these areas. Just slightly pry up and just work in very small increments. All right, so now this side looks a lot more like the other side. One thing I do notice here is that it is a little low. Let's just snug up the top bolts. And what we're gonna do here, we're gonna put some shims here on the lower back part of the hinge. Okay, we'll loosen the bolt and we'll slide our shim in place. Okay, so we put our shims in. Now let's check to see how it looks. There we go. So it looks like we're in the right direction here. Okay, so now the next thing is to adjust the latch. A lot of times when you're fitting it, you can also remove it. That way it goes all the way down. Okay, just make sure it slides in and out freely. It looks like this one's a little sticky. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the latch and check the slotted holes to see if there's any issues there, because it feels a little sticky. I can see where the bolt was getting hung up a little bit. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a file to slightly elongate the slot so the travel is smooth. Okay, so now let's reinstall the latch. So now we've adjusted the trunk catch. Let's go ahead and make sure it closes. This is something you may have to adjust a couple times to get the right function. Basically, you just want to push on it, and that click means that it's engaged. So it's correctly adjusted. And don't forget your bump stops over here in these corners. And that's pretty much all it takes to install your trunk lid. And that's how it's done. Thank you for joining us at the Classic Industries Tech Center, and check back with us online for future installs.